I am Beth. I use she, her pronouns. I've been working in the nonprofit space for just over 10 years and in grants specifically for about the past 8. And in that time have been involved in several different roles from operations to development and fundraising, along with being a grant professional and a consultant. I am also the executive director of a Pennsylvania-based nonprofit. And I've been a reviewer for Unfunded List for about almost 4 years now. So I've been on a couple of sides of this relationship building topic, especially with grant makers. I've worked with a variety of different teams while doing so and have used those relationships to get some funding for everything from repointing bricks on historic buildings to celebrating Pennsylvania's beer industry. So really excited to be here today, put all that different experience behind today's topic and help you all leave with some really practical tools to strengthen grant seeking within your own organizations. Thank you for everyone who has already put a little introduction in the chat. It is so cool to see people across the country, across the world joining us. And I know you all have a lot of really wonderful experience as well. So throughout today's session, please use the chat to ask me any questions. I'm going to do my best to keep an eye out on there, but please also chime in and include some tips, some of your knowledge, what you have learned working in grants. We love for that to be a part of the session as well. All right, so our goal for our time together today is to talk about the familiarity gap. What is this gap and how do we navigate it so that your organization can go from a stranger to a grant maker to a trusted partner and one that stays top of mind when new opportunities come up. Of course, the ultimate goal is to strengthen grant seeking in your own organization so you can secure the funding that you really need to do the amazing work that each of you are doing in your communities. So we're going to talk about all of these pieces here in a little bit and define that familiarity gap a little bit more as well. All right, and I should mention also that while I am keeping an eye on the chat, we'll hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to ask questions as well. So either keep pestering me in the chat and keep asking, or save it for the end and we can talk about your questions there as well. So just a brief look at our agenda for today. We are going to start by identifying entry points for funders. Then we'll talk a little bit more about that familiarity gap and what that really means, as well as ways to navigate that gap and close that gap between you and your funders. And then we'll focus on actions you can implement as early as today if you want to, so that you can be top of mind for your funders. Really, all of this, everything we're going to talk about today is how do you go from one organization out of many and start taking steps towards making connections and building relationships. So just to get started, we want to remember that relationships are a best practice. They're one of the 5 R's that we like to say about grant writing or grant writing life cycle. You'll see that we cheated a little bit there on writing and forced it into an R, but this is our grant life cycle. You've probably seen something similar to this, or maybe this exact graphic before. Sometimes it's a list, but I like to see it as the cycle because these are things that are happening as you prepare and submit grants. And it is likely happening in your organization already, whether you are looking at grants for the very first time, whether you've been doing it for a year, or whether you've been applying for grants for 15 years or more. Today, we're going to talk about and situate ourselves within relationships. And when we start to think about relationships and building connections, we're going to go backwards just a little bit on this cycle and assume that we have already done the grant readiness work within our organizations. We know we want to start grant seeking and that the organization is ready for this type of funding, or you have already done that and you're already applying for grants, which is probably how you found your way to Unfunded. So we've done that readiness piece, and it is important that that happens before we get to the relationships. And the same with research. Not saying that you have to have your full year-long grant calendar ready to go at this point, but you know that there are funders that align with your mission and that you would like to approach. And that's when we get to the relationship piece. It's no surprise. I see so many people in here who have been involved in grants for a long time. So it is no surprise that grant seeking has looked very different over the past few months, over the past few years, very different from what it used to look like, and it is constantly evolving. We are seeing with our clients and the funders that they work with, just record numbers of applications coming to grantmakers. It's for a variety of reasons, but it includes, though certainly not limited to, an increase in organizations that need to pivot and find more private and local funders due to federal funding cuts. And that is for our folks here in America, but I'm sure there are similar situations worldwide when one funding source changes or adapts or pivots. We're going to see a large increase in another area. We're also seeing, of course, a large increase in the use of AI for grant writing, which means more applications are being submitted for each opportunity. And we've seen some pretty wild things over the past few months, like funders shutting down their portals early because they received too many applications, meaning they communicated a deadline, but then they received so many proposals, they couldn't even keep it open until that deadline. One foundation shared that they typically receive about 125 applications per quarter. And in their most recent round, they received 900. Another funder accepts a certain number of applications every time their portal opens. So they put it right on their website. I think it's 800. The portal will stay open until we get the first 800 applications. And again, in this most recent round, the portal closed 23 minutes after it opened. Usually it's at least open for a few days, but 23 minutes later, they had received 800 applications. And then we've seen others that are accepting all of the applications, but the percentage that they're funding is just such a small amount. One of our clients just received an award, and in the award letter, the funder shared that they only awarded 3% of the applications that they received. That's not a lot of applications. So, and they received way beyond what they had to distribute. So we've seen lots of changes. We've seen lots of crazy things. So how do you stand out from these record numbers? And I would love, again, if you're comfortable sharing in the chat, if you have seen similar situations. Have you seen portals close down? Have you heard from funders about challenges on their end? If you've seen anything, please feel free to drop that in there. But it does make you wonder, how are you going to stand out? It's not just about getting the application in for the deadline. It's not just about having a well-written proposal that demonstrates the true impact, though that is more important than ever, especially with the use of AI. A well-written proposal that's connected to the funder is going to stand out. But there are others who will be submitting similar competitive proposals. So the real difference is going to come down to connections and relationships. And our team, we're calling relationships the word of the year for grants. There is a blog linked here that you can follow the QR code. My colleague Megan just dropped the link in the chat for you as well. So you can read more about our thoughts on that. But essentially, that's why we're here today, because it is getting more and more competitive, and we want to make sure that our organizations are standing out and we're getting the funding. And when it comes down to it, Relationships are such a critical part of the grant process because grant-making organizations are led by people. It is very easy to see funders as an entity, especially when a lot of interactions and grants can feel transactional. You don't always get to see the face that you can associate with the foundation. So it is easy to forget sometimes that the face is there. But at the end of the day, funding relationships are people granting to people. There is a person or people on both sides of this relationship, and it is important to remember that. And I'm just going to pause really quickly. I noticed myself freezing a little bit. Did I freeze at all for you? I'm still going good. Okay, Dave says I'm still going good. All right. And so when we're thinking about this idea of giving to people, we're working with people, even when it's a grant maker, you likely wouldn't approach a large individual donor in your community by just sending them a letter in the mail and asking them to donate. If we have any gift officers on the call or anyone who works in individual giving, could you imagine if you just found someone and then sent them a letter and hoped that they gave you money? It is very similar for grant makers. Not every funder wants to talk with you. Not every funder has the capacity, but first of all, many do, and a lot more than we initially assume. And we'll talk about that a little more here in a moment. But secondly, even if they don't have the capacity, think about how different it would be to receive a letter in the mail from an organization that you've at least heard of before. So considering this and putting an emphasis on relationships can really make a big difference in how successful you are in grant seeking. So how do we do this? How do we find the best way to get started with building relationships? The first thing that we want to consider is building relationships early. We want to get this started long before the proposal is submitted, whenever we can. And we want to make it a priority, part of our strategic grant seeking process, so that we can incorporate it into our whole year-long grant calendar or our whole year-long plan. But before we go any further, let's stop for a moment and look at what we really mean by relationships. I have done a few webinars like this before, and the focus really has always been on relationships, but that is such a vast spectrum, especially with funders and what that might look like. And that's why we're really making it talk about connections today. That's a little bit more bite-sized. It makes it seem a little bit more approachable than thinking, where on the spectrum of relationships am I falling with our funders? If you have been in funder cultivation for a while, whether it's a foundation or a corporation or individual donors, you know that these relationships can range anywhere from you received a letter from them one time, receiving your grant award, and you never heard from them again, all the way to a program officer that you can call up or go grab coffee with and talk about your organization's newest program. That is such a large range between what could look like an entry-level relationship all the way to these strong, long-lasting relationships that we want to have with our funders. And in most cases, you will be starting as kind of that cold call. So when we say relationships, perhaps a better word is really connections. How can we start building connections to begin bridging that gap of the large spectrum of what a relationship could look like? And what is that point of entry? And really, that's going to be different for each funder based on their capacity and their preference for building connections. How do we find that? How do we know what each funder wants? And it really can be so specific to that grant maker. So it's important that you do your research and you determine their capacity and their preference for outreach, for starting to build connections. But of course, it isn't in grants, it never is. It isn't just as straightforward as a page on their website that tells you how to contact them. So we are going to look at a few real life examples here. So for this first example, we see that the funder has capacity for outreach and making connections. This is from their frequently asked questions page. Can you contact this foundation before applying? Yes, and here is how you do it. In the second example, this is for the Minneapolis Foundation, and they do ask you to do some things before you do some outreach. They want to make sure you've reviewed the strategic framework and the grant guidelines, but they also encourage you to talk with their director of strategic impact before you apply. Funders have thought about this, but are becoming better at realizing grant seeking, writing grants, putting proposals together is a really big time commitment. It takes a lot of capacity from the applicants. It also takes a lot of capacity from them to review everything. And if you could spend a little bit of time now talking to someone and save yourself submitting an application that maybe you aren't eligible for, that could help you. It could help them. And more funders are realizing this and making it an opportunity, making opportunities for you to reach out to them. But this open outreach process, especially before you apply, is becoming more rare. And it's just because, again, of that sheer number of applications they're receiving. They just don't have the capacity to talk to everyone before it's submitted. So we do see this sometimes, but it's becoming a little less common. And so here's another example. This funder says that first-time applicants must contact the staff before you submit an application. In this case, 100%, if you submit an application without contacting the staff first, you are that random envelope in the mail, and you are guaranteed that you will not be funded. What is interesting here is that they don't say how, so it's not as clear as the past example. Here's the link, here's how you do it. So you are probably going to have to do some more research on their website and determine the best way to reach out. Maybe you will have to try a couple different ways, but the bottom line is this funder wants you to speak with them before you submit an application. And this next example here is actually from that same funder, but for a different funding program, and they have different guidelines for their capacity and preference from this program. So again, they don't like to make it too easy for us, but that's why the research piece and looking for these points of entry is such an important part of the process. In this for this program, they're saying, step 1, take the quiz. Step 2, apply. Very different than first-time applicants must contact us. So what would you do here? Would you reach out to them? I would say that the funder has shown you they have capacity, at least to some extent, because in other grant programs, they do want to talk to applicants. And they have a preference because they didn't tell us not to. So I take this as we should try. We know they have some capacity, but you want to make sure in this case that you take that quiz before you reach out to them, because if you do and you aren't even eligible for funding, you've wasted their time, you've wasted your time. That quiz is step 1 for a reason. But basically, unless a funder explicitly states that they do not welcome outreach or they do not have capacity for outreach, and some funders, of course, will, unless it says that, you should always try. Worst case scenario, you don't get in touch with anyone. But at the very least, maybe they'll recognize your organization's name. And we're starting to close that familiarity gap, which we'll, again, talk about even more in a little bit. But best case scenario, maybe you do get to talk to someone, and that could make a really big difference. And if funders do have the capacity, others will be doing it. They will be reaching out. They will be trying to make those connections and to talk to a funder before they apply. And now they have the competitive advantage. So if they don't tell you not to, you should at least try, find some contact information, and see if you can get a chance to talk with them. So we found out, could we, would we, how do we do it? Now we need to consider who we are trying to reach out to. You saw in a few examples, they tell you explicitly who you should be contacting. Sometimes they don't provide specifics and you have to do a little bit more research. You want to think about what information you are hoping to share, or maybe the questions that you have, and that would definitely inform who you are reaching out to and who on your team should be doing the contacting. It does not always need to be the person writing the grant. For some organizations that we work with, it's an assistant director who does the outreach, or the executive director. Maybe it's program staff, or it is development staff. We even have a few whose board members do outreach for them, and that is the dream, but obviously not the reality for everyone. But you want to think about who you are contacting on their side, and then who is the best person to contact that individual on your side. And on the screen here, you'll see something we provide to clients as part of our research. And that's what we call our relationship questionnaire. Make sure that you know who is on the board of directors and the foundation staff. Again, a lot of times they will have a specific person to reach out to, regardless of whether or not that information is available. This could be a really great way to skip some of what feels like a cold call and bring you further along the relationship spectrum. What we typically do with these is share a group of the relationship questionnaires all at once to the board or to key staff, like maybe the executive director, and say, here are some foundations that we have researched. We've determined that they're a strong fit. Here is who is on their board, or here who works at the grant makers organization. Does anyone know anyone? If you put it together in a nice packet like that, you have an easy to read form like the one you see on the screen here. It should just take them a few minutes to glance through the packet, and there might be a really awesome connection that you can leverage. And again, you're skipping that cold call feeling and moving a little bit further along the spectrum. And yes, Megan added in the chat that this questionnaire will be included in the materials you get after the call. And then a pro tip here too, don't forget to think about LinkedIn connections. It is a really great way to connect with people. I mean, I get messages from people all the time on LinkedIn that I don't know. And so people forget that it is a really great networking tool, and that goes for grant makers as well. Find board members, find program staff, see if you get a chance to talk with them. But again, we have to address the reality of funder relationships in 2026. It is not just about the phone calls and the emails anymore, especially as volume continues to increase and opportunities for open outreach become more and more rare. Really need to focus on other ways for closing that familiarity gap. Which it basically means, what can you do so that they recognize your name when you apply? Making this a part of your process, a part of your grant seeking, something you regularly do, and being strategic about it can make a huge difference in taking those cold leads, making them warm prospects, and then maybe even taking it further. Even if you don't have an opportunity to talk with them, or you don't have any connections from the board lists or the staff lists, consider how you can personalize your stewardship and your networking. So again, you become familiar. They think of you when they think of opportunities. It's similar to the idea of college admissions. They want to know if you came on a tour to the college campus. They're looking for your name, for engaging with them and being involved in things before you apply. And sometimes that can make a really big difference in the review of your application. Same thing in grant making here. It's about expressing interest. It's about becoming visible within their ecosystem. And this is also a really great tip, even for funders who don't accept unsolicited proposals. We're seeing a lot more of that as these open processes become just completely overwhelmed. More funders are saying, we are going to contribute to a pre-selected group of organizations, or something like unsolicited proposals are not invited to apply, which means you have to have the connection. You have to know someone at the foundation before your application can be submitted and considered. And something like these little steps that we are going to talk about here, if you don't ever get in front of them, you might not ever have the opportunity. So how can you get in front of them? So what are some steps that really we can start doing today, if you choose to, where this stewardship and networking can start to happen and you're starting to close the familiarity gap? Few ideas here is to sign up for their newsletters. Make sure you know what is going on with the funder and make it beyond, oh, their annual grant program opened up. A lot of people are looking for that annual grant program to open up. But what events are they hosting, especially if they are a local funder, if there's someone within your community? What events are they hosting? What information sessions do they have? How and where are they networking? I worked with a client recently who they've received funding from this grant maker before. They had a pretty good relationship. It's one of those grant programs that you typically get year over year once you're within their list of grantees. And they had an information session that we were a little hesitant to join because we already knew so much about the process. We joined that information session, ended up with a lot of questions that we didn't realize that we had, and ended up being able to schedule 2 inquiry calls with their program staff, where we got to ask, it was just us and their program staff, and we got to ask very specific questions. That opportunity wouldn't have even been available if we hadn't attended that information session. So make sure you know what's going on with your grant makers. Also, have your social media accounts follow their social media accounts. This is a bit different of a situation because we aren't a funder, but I mentioned at the beginning that when I'm not writing grants or talking about grants, I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit. And one of the things that we do, we're a digital platform, and we use that platform in our established audience to feature Pennsylvania makers and farmers. We want to make it so more people see their story, know about them, and then support them. And a lot of times the way that we find out about someone new to feature is because they interact with us on social media. They've liked one of our videos, they've shared one of our videos, maybe they've posted something in the comments. It takes just a few minutes for us to click on that person's social media account or that business's social media account and see if it is someone that we want to talk about and that we want to feature. And I can assure you that grant makers are doing the same. They notice who interacts with them as well. So don't discount following them on social media and interacting with them on social media. We touched on this a little already, but go where the funders go. Attend forums and regional events and local events. Introduce yourself if you have the opportunity to, and don't just make it about a pitch for your organization or for the grant program. Especially if we're doing this regularly and it's something happening year round, something that's happening well in advance of us submitting a proposal. It is about making connections and networking and building a genuine relationship. So again, when that opportunity comes up, they think about you, whether they invite you to it or whether they just recognize your organization's name when the proposals come in, now you have a little bit of that competitive advantage. And as we make these connections and we start to bridge that familiarity gap, we need to ask ourselves, what actions do we as an organization need to start doing now so that we stay top of mind for our connections? And in this case, specifically, grant makers. I am sure that many of you are hearing this list of ideas and think, that's lovely. I am a grant team of one, and I do not have the capacity to do all of these things. I completely understand that as well. A lot of us have been there and being on that solo grant team, the grant hero, if you will. But it doesn't mean that you have to implement everything right now. And you'll find as we go through some things in this next section that there are things that you maybe are already doing and you just aren't doing it yet for your grant makers. Whether you're doing it already or your organization is doing it already, it might be something that you just need to include your grant makers in, and then it isn't a lot of capacity or time suck from there. And one of those things is to make sure that you have a consistent communication cadence that allows you to share your impact and keep your mission visible all year long. Again, it shouldn't just be about the grant application. We want the funder to recognize your organization when the proposal comes in, not after the proposal comes in because they're looking at your proposal right now. So do you have a newsletter? Do you share an annual report? What are you putting on your social media and your website? When they click on your social media profile or search for your organization because they met you at an event, what are they seeing? Typically, depending on what your organization looks like, if you are bigger than one or two people, you might have a whole different department that takes care of all of this. But make sure that you're leveraging that and that you know, as the one who's building connections with the grant makers, what are they going to see when they click on our website? And how can I help support the team? Or what information can I provide so that it is consistent and it is impactful? And that's the messaging that we're giving out. Another really important one here is to include grant maker outreach in your annual grant calendar. When you sit down, whether it's at the beginning of the fiscal year or the beginning of the calendar year, and you think about all of the opportunities you want to apply for throughout the year, or all of the funders that you want to approach, make sure that outreach is included in that. Again, we might be a team of one. Even if we're not a team of one, we probably don't have a lot of extra time. And we have all been in the position where we say, oh, as soon as I have time, I'm going to do some outreach. But spoiler alert, we are busy people and we are not going to have time unless we make the time. And you want to make sure that this is something that you are talking about and agreeing on with other people in your organization. We work with all different size organizations as clients. The organization that I'm the director for is a very small organization, but we hear a lot, well, grants is no one else's priority. This is my job. Program staff, leadership, or whoever have so many other things to worry about. And true, grants may not be in their job title or one of their key responsibilities, but the outreach and the funder relationships and building connections is a piece of grant seeking that needs to be supported by the larger team. You will be so much more successful with outreach and with your grant seeking overall if you make sure that your organization is prioritizing relationships. If your director is going to an event, make sure they know what funders are going to be there. Have that as part of your grant calendar so you can talk to them ahead of time. Make sure that they get an introduction in. And if we're talking about how important these relationships are, it can't take a backseat. Making sure it is written into our grant calendar, make sure that it gets the attention it deserves and the thought put into it that is going to make it successful and worthwhile. It's also helpful to be part of the larger plan because then it can be strategically placed. If a funder wants us to reach out before applying, I'm not going to call them up the day before I submit the application. Or if you're planning ahead of time, as I had just mentioned with your director, also with you, anyone else on staff, are you going to see them at an upcoming event? Because maybe you can talk to them beforehand, or maybe you can strategically place follow-up so you know that you can talk with them afterwards based on the conversation that you had there together. So this helps us bridge that familiarity gap and make genuine connections that can grow without just immediately going to the ask, which of course is the very important part to us. But if we're building those relationships, we're going to be more successful with the ask. So here are some more examples, some passive techniques, which means it might be something you're already doing. Sharing your newsletters. There are a lot of ways to make connections without a lot of additional time and effort, whether this is in your responsibilities or falls somewhere else in the organization. Find out what your organization does for individual donors or for corporations or for volunteers, and see what maybe you can use that you already have and just add your grant makers to that. Or you can use some more active techniques, which again, we all are pretty strapped for time these days. So you might have to pick and choose what you do here. These might take a little bit more work, but again, they can be done strategically and prioritized as part of your overall plan. Interact on social media, handwritten follow-up notes after you meet someone or you talk with them. Invite them for a site visit. Again, doesn't have to be related to an application. Have them come in and see what your organization is doing, see it in action. And then when a grant opportunity does come up, that's who they're going to think about, is the organization that they visited and they saw what was happening there and the change that you are actually creating. Invite them to your special events. And this isn't just about new grant makers either. This can be about existing grant makers, because starting the connection is part of it. Building the connection is the other piece. If you want to take a first-time funder into an annual funder, you're going to have to build that relationship there and make more connections and make a deeper connection. If you want to take the $10,000 grant and turn it into $50,000 general operating support, these are the things that you're going to have to do, even with people who are already funding you. Another action that you can start today and that could really impact how you make connections and how you can be sure that you are the one the grant maker remembers is to draft and practice what you are going to say when you connect with someone. We recommend preparing talking points for an in-person interaction, because then that can be used when connecting on the phone or even translating it into an email. But the more comfortable you are with it ahead of time, the more genuine it's going to sound, the easier it is going to be to connect with people, and the more likely you will have gotten your main points across. So we have some things here for talking points up on the screen. One of the first things is to include a brief introduction. Of course, they should know who you are. They should know what agency you are with. But we highlight and bold and star brief here because you probably won't have a lot of time. Whether you're talking with them on the phone, whether you are meeting with them in person, maybe you're sending an email, you're not going to have a lot of time for this. So right now is probably not the time to provide them with the full story of how your organization was founded. That is information that can be shared in your grant proposal, but it is, of course, important for them to know who you are and what organization you're with. The next piece is why you think your organization is a good match. Don't ask them why or if they think that you are a strong potential funding partner. Tell them why you believe that you are based on what you have researched about them. We've seen what your mission and your priorities are, and this is how our programs respond to that. We see the change that you're trying to make in your community, and this is what our organization is doing to make that happen. Show them that you've done the research, that you've looked into them, and you know what is important to them and why they should be funding you to help further what is important to them. And then also ask questions. Drew attention to here again to a specific word, thoughtful. Whenever possible, again, who knows when you're going to be talking to someone, so you may not have researched them ahead of time, but whenever possible, don't ask basic questions that can be answered on their website or with their frequently asked questions. It might make them think that you didn't do your research, which isn't something you want to convey. If you have emailed them, asked for a time to meet, set up a call, and now you're on the phone with them and you ask them something that's on the first page of their website, it looks like you didn't look at the first page of their website. You are also missing an opportunity to really make use of your time with them. Something like, is there a recommended ask amount for first-time applicants? The 990s, the past giving history only gives you so much information. For a first-time applicant, is there a range for grant awards that I should be considering? Or maybe you've noticed that they have a rolling deadline, but is there a specific time of year that aligns best with your project and their available funding? We have had funders tell us in the past that just have an open submit any time of year process, who have told us submit at the end of the year, because once we get to this point, we typically have funding left and it's the end of the year, everyone's busy. So we typically have less applications that are coming in. So that's when you should do it. Excuse me. If nothing else, ask them about a recent project or a funding relationship that they are proud of. Give them a chance to humble brag on the work that they are doing, and then use that information to answer for yourself what they're looking for in funding relationships and projects. We, along with the relationship questionnaires, will provide these talking points to a lot of different people at organizations as well. It makes the executive director or the board member feel more comfortable talking with the connection, doing the outreach, getting the right questions answered, getting the right information out there, if you have this to share with them. So it's not talking points just for you. It can be talking points for anyone in your organization. And then once you have these talking points, it is about having them and then actually verbally practicing your story. You want to think about what it's going to sound like when you deliver these points. And our team actually practiced this a few months ago as part of a learning exercise. So as consultants, we have several clients to choose from. We got 1 minute on the clock and we practiced an elevator pitch using some talking points for the organization. And I will admit that I went into that pretty confident because I got to use PA Eats, which is the organization that I'm the director for. So I thought I had a little bit of an edge on my colleagues. I got to use an organization that I'm extremely familiar with, not just a client who we support in various different ways with their grant seeking. And it is a lot harder than you'd think. We often have so much knowledge about our organizations and our programs, and we could talk for hours about it. But you don't want to talk for hours. You probably aren't going to have hours to talk. So you need to know what your main points are that you want to focus on, and you want to make sure that you are saying that in a meaningful way to your specific audience. Elevator pitches, organizational one-pagers are great when you are thinking about having a template. But again, every funder has something different that is meaningful for them. And so you want to make sure that you have talking points for that specific funder and that you're practicing it out loud. So that when you are talking to them, when you get to email them, when you meet them at an event, and they don't know who you are or what you do, you can share your story with so much passion and in such a meaningful way that they want to give you money to support your work. So we had 1 minute to do this, and then we did it again, and we had 30 seconds on the timer to do our elevator pitch, to talk about our organization. And this was definitely a lot harder, but it was also helpful to practice this. When you are talking with someone, even when you are maybe submitting an LOI, is it important to mention the year that it was founded? If they ask for it, yes, absolutely. But when you have them on the phone for 30 seconds, is that the most important thing that you have to say about your organization or your program? I would say probably half of us started with, hi, I'm calling from such and such organization. We're a 501c3. And that took up precious seconds that really might not be important to the funder right now. It's going to be important when you're submitting an application. So practicing it out loud and doing it in this way as a timed exercise is going to make sure you know your main points and that they will leave the conversation remembering your organization. And they should be able to answer what makes your organization the best investment for them. And the other reason to practice it, and like really practice it out loud, if you are in an office setting, maybe you have somewhere quiet to go, maybe you're just going to talk to yourself in the office setting, but actually practicing it out loud, when you write it down, it's very easy for it to sound flat or factual. And you don't want to sound like that when you are on the phone with them or you are meeting a funder, or even if you're sending an email. If you've heard yourself say it, you know how to make it more engaging and impactful. And now you can make sure that that passion is coming across when you're talking with them or emailing them, or honestly, even in your grant applications. So we aren't going to have time to practice these today, but truthfully, set a little timer for yourself and pretend that you've called up the funder and talk to them about why they should give some money to your organization. All right, so as we are reaching the end of our time here today, I do want to call attention to one of the free bonus materials that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's our Grantmaker Relationship Guide. It's going to give you some of those templates we talked about today, some more tips, all that good stuff. You can use the QR code here, but it will also be sent with your follow-up materials. And we are just about at the end, but if anyone has any questions or thoughts, as I'm going through these last few kind of housekeeping slides, please start putting them in the chat box. I've also included my contact information here in case you want to chat after today's session. I'd love to hear from you. My email's here. Also find me on LinkedIn. And I wanted to invite you to join us next Friday at our 7th annual Learn Grants Summit. It's a free 2-hour event. We have 6 amazing speakers in that 2-hour time frame, talking about all things grants. It's a nice bite-sized tips and nuggets. It's one of my favorite events of the year. And it's our team's way of celebrating International Grant Professionals Day, which if you didn't know is a thing, now you do. So there's a QR code for that here as well. But with that, thank you all so much for your time today. It was great spending my afternoon with you. And Dave, anything before we sign off here?
First, thank you very much for coming and also for your reviews over the years. One thing I really that resonated with me and what you just talked about is that one can this is a practicable skill. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes when we think about building relationships, we think that's right. It's just something that we're all naturally like. That's a natural skill, but you can and should practice it. And I, in fact, think Unfunded List is a great way to do so. You get the feedback report in written form, but we also offer report discussions that take place with Margaret and I. Some of the folks on the call have been to those report discussions. And I should point out, I do have some program officer experience. I have represented grant makers and talked to funders in that regard. Unfunded List is not going to fund you, but you come to that call and you can treat me like a program officer, practice pitching your organization. I can give you feedback in real time. And the good news there is you can't screw it up. There are a few people who have offended me so badly that we do stop reviewing their proposals, but that is pretty rare. You can, and we have lots of people have come to that conversation and we've noticed that that has been their first time that they've ever talked about one of their grant proposals or their organizations directly with an outsider. I do think that is a really important part of our program. And I think it's a good way to think about how to use our program, right? Treat that report discussion like you're practicing for a site visit. And let me know that that's how you're treating it. And I'm more than happy to put my program officer hat on. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time in case folks have questions. We do have 5 minutes or so here. If anybody has any questions in the chat, or feel free to use the hand raising feature.
I do see one about whether or not the session was recorded, and yes, it was, and you will receive the recording. And I see another one too about organizations or gatherings of funders that are open to the general public. It's going to look different in a lot of different places, but typically you will find something in your area where funders or a major funder in your community has something that is open to the general public, especially now in today's world with what is available using Zoom and online information and capabilities. A lot of times it will be a virtual opportunity to meet funders, to talk about it, funder panels. Keep an eye out. Newsletters are a great way to keep an eye out. Stay networked with other organizations in your local community so that you can find when those types of events are happening.
We do have someone raised their hand. Mary.
Hey, that was my question as well. I was looking for any like hidden gems, and I imagine it would be pretty specific, Beth, but if you have any examples of places where you've been able to connect with funders in person, it sounds like you already answered them.
I'll say those are likely to be regional. I'm based in Maine. The Maine Association of Nonprofits has several events a year that members are welcome to attend. There's also most states or regions will have a community foundation that will sometimes have events, or there will be some sort of some of these have gone wayward the last few years, but there used to be regional associations of grant makers. In Maine, we have Maine Philanthropy Center. DC, the DC area used to have Philanthropy DMV, which they are gone now, unfortunately. But some of the other funders have stepped up to provide those events. In general, like we pointed out at the beginning of the call, funders are getting too many requests these days. So they are often very careful about that sort of thing, which doesn't necessarily make it easier for the grant seeker.
That's right. All right. And Anna, I see, is it Anna?
It's Anna. I was just wondering, thank you for asking. I was just wondering if you had mentioned that like portals, how AI is taking over the application process. Did funders give any feedback on how they feel about that, or how they feel about receiving so many AI requests, or how they're dealing with it?
Yeah, we're finding, of course, it depends on the funder, but we're seeing both sides of it. We're seeing funders who are saying in their guidelines, you may not use AI to put any of this proposal together. We're seeing other funders who are just curious about it. They might just ask in their grant application, did you use AI? How did you use AI? But really, it is coming down to pretty much all of them are sending messaging either with denials, denial letters. Maybe they're putting it on their website where they're just saying, because of the use of AI, we know that we are going to get even more applications than typical. So submit early or make sure you talk to someone. And then we do have, Megan just put in the chat, we did a recent AI survey with some grant makers. So you can follow the link there, and it's going to give you a little bit more about the state of AI in grant making. And I see another question from Elisa.
Yes, thank you so much, Beth. I recently learned of a smaller foundation that had made the decision to create almost an incubation year where they took concept papers and then provided more hands-on grant support, in part because they appreciated the barriers to applications. And in part because they felt the quality of the proposals they were receiving weren't sufficiently innovative. So it's a double question. The first is, how much of this incubator model have you seen? And the second question is, how are grant reviewers thinking about innovation these days?
Yeah, so we are seeing that. Whether they specifically are calling it something like an incubation model, or they're saying, we want to talk with you and work on this, that is something that we're seeing. Other foundations or corporate funders or grant makers, we're seeing them just shut down their grant process and saying it is now not an open process, and we will be pre-selecting organizations. We've also seen a few other foundations who are taking an even further step back and kind of taking a gap year almost, where they are not going to accept applications for right now. They're rethinking their strategy. They want to talk with nonprofits in their community and figure out what the best way to move forward is. And that might not even end in a grant award. It might just end in a change in their process. And then the second part of your question, innovation is a tough word. And especially from the nonprofit side, we're just trying to get money for what we're already doing. Let us keep doing what we're doing before we get too innovative. But a lot of times what we'll say is that's a situation where if you can talk to a funder, you really should figure out what they believe is innovative, what they are looking for when they're talking about funding innovation, because maybe there is a way that you can talk about what you're already doing and using their funding to reach new people or adjust some of your programming, and it could still be a competitive proposal.